All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to tackle one of React's most powerful, but sometimes confusing features, the Context API. And hey, if you've ever found yourself passing props down through what feels like a million different components, yeah, this is for you.
So let's start with a scenario. I bet you've been here before. You've got some piece of data, right? Maybe it's the current user or a theme setting, and you need it way down deep inside your component tree. So what do? You start passing that prop from component to component to component, even through ones that couldn't care less about it. It's a total pain.
Well, that whole frustrating process, it actually has a name. It's called prop drilling. It's one of the most common headaches you'll run into building React apps, so let's really break down why it's such a problem.
To get it, you got to go back to the basics. Every React app is, at its heart, a tree of components. You've got your main app component at the very top, and then everything else just branches down from there like a big family tree.
And in this tree, data has a very strict one-way ticket. It flows from the top down, from parent components to their children, using this thing we all know and love, props. It's super predictable, and it's a huge part of what makes React work so well.
But here's the catch. Here's where it gets messy. What happens when some little component buried deep in that tree needs data that lives all the way up at the top? Well, with the standard props approach, you have no choice. You have to pass that prop through every single layer in between.
And this is where the real pain begins. Prop drilling just makes your code a nightmare to manage. I mean, what if you need to change the name of that prop? Now you're digging through like 10 different files just to make one simple update. It's super error-prone, a pain to refactor, and it just doesn't scale as your app gets bigger.
But thankfully, we don't have to live like that. React has given us a built-in escape hatch, a much cleaner way to handle this kind of data sharing. And you guessed it, it's called the Context API.
So what is this thing really? Think of the Context API as a way to create a sort of wireless data network for a section of your app. Instead of passing data down hand to hand, any component inside this network can just tune in and grab the data it needs directly. It lets you completely sidestep prop drilling.
And just look at the difference. On the left, you've got this tangled, messy chain of props. On the right, a nice, clean, direct connection from the source of the data to the component that needs it. This isn't just about writing less code, you know? It's about building something that's way easier to understand and maintain. It's a total game changer.
Okay, it sounds great in theory, but how does it actually work? Well, it's simpler than you might think. Let's break it down into 3 simple parts, a core trio that you can easily remember.
It's a 3-step dance. Step 1, you create the context. This is like setting up the radio frequency. Step 2, you use a special provider component to wrap a part of your app and actually provide the data you want to share. And step 3, any component inside that provider can then consume that data. That's it. Create, provide, consume. Easy.
You know, a really great way to think about it is like a radio broadcast. The provider is the broadcast tower, sending out a signal. That's your data. And only the components that are wrapped inside that provider, the ones with their radios turned on and tuned to the right station, can actually hear that signal.
And here's where the real React magic kicks in. When the data in that provider changes, let's say the user logs out, the broadcast signal updates instantly, and every single component that's listening automatically re-renders with the new info. It keeps your whole UI perfectly in sync without you having to lift a finger. But, and this is a big but, like any powerful tool, context isn't the right tool for every single job. Knowing when to use it is just as important as knowing when to, well, not use it. So, here's the deal. Context is at its absolute best when you're dealing with data that's truly global and doesn't change all that often. We're talking about things like, is the user logged in? What's their username? Is the app in dark mode or light mode? What's the current language? Stuff that lots of components might need, but that stays pretty much the same for a while. Think of this table as your little cheat sheet. Is the data needed all over your app and pretty stable? Context is your friend. Is it only used by a couple of components that are right next to each other? Honestly, props are probably simpler. And if the data is changing constantly, like what someone is typing into a form, using context can actually hurt your performance.
And I really want to stress that performance point. It's a big deal, because every single component that's subscribed to a context will re-render every time the context value changes. So if you put something that updates all the time into context, you could accidentally trigger a massive chain reaction of re-renders across your app, and that'll slow things down.
So how do we use it without shooting ourselves in the foot? A few pro tips. First, keep your context values small. Don't pass the entire user object if all you need is their name. Second, split things up. Have one context for authentication and a completely separate one for the theme. That way, changing the theme won't cause components that only care about the user to re-render.
And really, if you remember just one thing from all this, let it be this. The Context API is a fantastic tool for sharing state. It solves the transportation problem, getting data from point A to point B. It is not a state management library on its own. It's not designed to handle really complex application logic by itself.
And that leads us to one last really important question. Context is perfect for that simple global stuff. But what happens when your global state gets, well, complicated, with all sorts of interconnected logic and moving parts? Well, that's when you start looking at combining context with other tools, or maybe even reaching for a dedicated state management library. But you know what? That is a whole other story for another day. Thanks for tuning in.